Good evening, everyone. My name is Peter Augustine. I would like to welcome you to tonight's webinar from our Black History Month series. And tonight I'm really, really lucky, and I'm a bit nervous as well. I've got two absolute massive players in the football world. Steve Smithies, who is the current CEO of Cheshire FA, and Mr. Les Howie, who was the former head of grassroots at the FA. He's now a consultant for a myriad of footballing organisations. And as he just said to me, he's also a football enthusiast and a volunteer. I think Les is a little bit more than that. And this is something you're going to find out more as we go through the evening. And tonight I'm ably assisted by Mr. Matthew Jones. Hi, Matthew. How are you doing?
I'm very well, Pete. And let me just say at this point, Les, Steve, a warm welcome. It's an absolute pleasure to be in your company. At the risk of putting you under pressure, I'm intrigued by the answers you're going to give to the questions we're going to chuck your way under the umbrella of Black History Month, diversity and inclusion, but also football as a connecting tool to all of us, hopefully on this call tonight. And Pete, I'll say this real quick. If you're nervous, it's a sign that you care and you want to do well. So don't worry about that.
Okay, yeah, and I do, and it's fascinating to have Les and Steve, who I both worked with, we've worked with over the time to hear their story. Now, what I will say before we start, and I hand you over to Matt, is if you've got any questions throughout the webinar, please put them in the chat box, because what we want to do is we want to hear from you as well. We want to hear your questions. We've got some questions as well, but you know, your questions, you're the people who've tuned in, and I want to say thank you so much for tuning in tonight. We want to hear your questions. So without any further ado, Matt, I'm going to hand over to you for the first question.
Thanks, Pete. And just to reiterate that point, we want it to be conversational. So we've got some questions to chuck in the direction of Steve and Les, but we want this to be an evening that you take something away from. So if you've got any burning questions around tonight's topic, please populate the chat box and we'll do our utmost to put them to Steve and Les. Steve, if I can come to you first, and then I'm going to bounce the same question to you, Les. So you've got a bit more thinking time, and that's not me having favourites. I'm sure we'll alternate as the evening goes through. But for those that listen to the High Performance podcast, they always start with what is high performance. So we're here in the middle of Black History Month. I'm interested to know, what does Black History Month mean to you as individuals? So Steve, firing that one at you.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Pete, for that lovely warm welcome. And good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining. Seeing some names on the chat already. So good evening, Rob and Graham and Colin et al. Matt, it's a great question, and it comes up a lot. And I think Black History Month is, it's known. It's very high profile now, which is fantastic. But I also think there's an element of what does it mean to people personally. So I can answer on my own behalf. I think it's a great opportunity to shine a spotlight on the fantastic work and the fantastic contribution that, particularly on this occasion, the Black community, mixed heritage community, and in fact all ethnic diverse communities have played in society. And we're going to focus on a bit around football tonight. And there's also been an absolutely fantastic and a long legacy of contribution to football. But what it means to me most of all, Matt, is a chance to celebrate what's gone on in the past, a chance to maybe reflect on where we are, and a real opportunity to talk about the future and how we collaborate and how we work together to ensure that football, in this particular case football, Matt, is safe, welcoming, and there's a place for everybody. I think it would be remiss of me not to say, look, there are some challenges. There really are. And I think that I know a great friend and mentor of us all, Dr. Colin King, will say, we've got to be careful about just having a Black History Month. I think we recognise that. I think it's important that we do shine a spotlight, and it's a celebration, and it's a chance to really, focus in. But it's also something, Matt, that we need to be talking about and looking at and celebrating and challenging all year round with a 365-day approach. So, really, really positive. But let's just also reflect on the fact that we need to be mindful that this is something we need to talk about and something we need to bring to life 12 months of the year.
What a warm answer, Steve. And I know it's important to you very personally. And at this point, I'll say I was part of the diversity and inclusion team that was put in post by the FA 12 months ago with you steering the ship. And I've certainly taken more of an interest, not just because it's in my job title, but because you've introduced me to it as a fellow football enthusiast, but more so a person on the same planet as me. So that warm answer is reflected in what you've done the last 12 months before you moved on to your new role, which we're going to ask you about a little bit later on. So, Les, the same question for you. What does Black History Month mean to you?
Matt, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Great to be with you this evening. First of all, you might have given me more thinking time, but the danger of going second is the person who speaks first takes everything away from you. And already said it all. So, maybe it's the thing what I'll share before I go into what it means to me. Black History Month's been around for a long time in England. I had never heard of it until about 6 years ago, when Steve had a conversation with me about the importance of Black History Month and why the FA should be doing more in that space. And so we had a conversation about how we could do more as a coach development team in grassroots at that time. And so a lot of it is about that education. So from a personal point of view, that was a help for me to be educated in this space. It's an opportunity to have conversations with people that you mightn't otherwise be able to have or feel comfortable having. So absolutely, it's about all the things around celebrate, promote, shine a light, but it's got to go beyond that as well. It's got to go, as Steve said, it's not just about a month. This month is great because it allows us the freedom to do that, but it should be an ongoing conversation. Because if we're really going to have change, it's something that doesn't last within 31 days at a given point in the calendar. It goes beyond that. So it's brilliant what it does, but I think for me the big thing is it allows us the freedom to be willing to have conversations. And that's why I think Black History Month is so important, but how do we take it beyond that as well?
And do you think, Steve, that those conversations have become easier to approach? And do you feel like there are more conversations taking place outside of Black History Month? And you might want to dovetail this into your new role as CEO.
Yeah, I think they have, Matt, and I think that's an important part of it. I think that it's a much easier on the tongue topic, and I think that allyship has played a huge part in that. I think that's really important. Les has been a massive ally to not just me, but to the Black and Asian community, and I see on the call more fantastic allies from the white community. We're all one community, Matt. I love your, we are all one community on the planet. You're absolutely right, and we all, there's no harm in celebrating that you can go away and join a community, just like you would celebrate you work when you live in a village or you live in a street. You're connected by something unique, and I see Deborah Dilworth on the call, a fantastic ally to inclusion. Graham Keeley played such a huge part. And I think that when people start talking about it, and Matt, we need to make it a safe place for people to talk about it. People can fail forward, people can ask questions, people can be inquisitive, and we should celebrate that as well, because there's a bit of trepidation sometimes around not saying the right thing or not being quite as savvy, and so that sometimes stops people talking about whether it be Black History Month, whether it be LGBT, whether it be women and girls issues, whether it be the menopause. We need to talk about things in a way that, look, how can I help? I don't know enough, but I really want to learn. So I'm in a good place to take the right steps and use the right language and be an ally. So really has come on leaps and bounds, Matt, down to brilliant people like yourself and the team in the D&I team at the FA. And what that looks like in the county FA land, Matt, is really interesting, because the county FAs are all working really hard to be more inclusive, to actually be more representative of the communities they serve. And I see nothing but hard work in that, Matt. And again, I see people at different stages of their development, Matt, like you've said, you've been on a journey. I think we're all on a journey, Matt. And allyship for me is really important. Allyship with education, inspiration, and perhaps more importantly, Matt, we just need to make it a safe space for people to talk about what the issues are, and understanding that everybody's the same but different, And this month is about celebrating Black History Month and all that goes in and around it. It's become so much better, Matt, because I think we're collaborating more.
Now, you've mentioned a word there, which is a small to middle-sized word, but it's a long trip. That is journey. So before I come to Les and ask about his journey linked to the various roles and hats he's worn in and around football and sport, what's been your journey to CEO at Cheshire? If you wouldn't mind giving us a whistle-stop tour, because I'm sure we've got some purposefully nosy people on tonight that would want to know, how have you got to where you are in your current role? Where have you been previously and the experiences along the way?
So one thing I'm really proud of, Matt, and I know that a lot of people are calling this from a football perspective. Like a lot of people on this call, like a lot of people in society, I love the game. And one of the reasons I love the game is as a young kid growing up in and out of foster homes. So it wasn't the best start, wasn't the worst either. But as a young kid growing in and out of foster homes and not enjoying the educational setting at the time, sport was a great leveler for me, Matt, because that and football particularly gave me an introduction to being part of a football community. So absolutely, fantastic opportunity for me to be somebody without being anybody and just play football and develop lots of social skills. And so football meant something special to me because that was my first entry into, if you like, a real form of acceptance. I then go into a completely different career. I have 20 years working in the rail industry, worked my way up from being, I shouldn't use that term, I don't like the term, but worked my way through, perhaps not up, worked my way through a number of jobs and was fortunate to get a couple of mentors along the way. Mentoring and mentors have been really important to me in my life. And so I ended up really having quite a good career in business. It wasn't that exciting, but it was good and it paid the bills to help me raise some fantastic children. And then I'm the archetypal coach, Matt. Marcus, who's 25 now, Marcus was 6 or 7, and I took him to a Saturday morning coaching session. And Matt, you couldn't make it up. There were short coaches, and the head coach said, "Do you mind stepping in?" And I made this mistake, Matt, saying yes. I made the fatal mistake. And Matt, later on in my career, I used that trick as well. I used that several times. And you know what? You can't say no when a guy with a smiling face, he was fantastic, and Marcus was there. So of course I'm emotionally invested, and I thought, yeah, I'll help out. And then a great guy called Chris Smith, who was an A licensed coach at the time, unbeknown to me, didn't even know what coaching was, to be honest with you. I just thought coaches were people who told me I wasn't very good at defending and I could head the ball. That was my experience of coaches. They were right, by the way. They were right. And he saw me. He actually saw me. He was a neighbour, and he saw me having a kickabout with Marcus in the back garden. And he said, "Look, you know what would help Marcus and you?" He said, "If he did the junior team manager course, which is what was the old level 1 and what is now introductory coaching." And from there, Matt, I really started to. Once I did that course, Matt, I really understood a little bit more about safeguarding, a little bit more structure, a little bit more around perhaps investing in the player, more about the player and less about myself. And then I went on this wonderful journey of watching Marcus play football, and then latterly Lucas, and I ended up being a grassroots coach. And then I did some other qualifications, and I was fortunate to work my way all the way up to A license. And what I realised when I got a license, Matt, on this coaching journey, is that actually the more coaching knowledge you have is really, really, really important. But you need to balance that with your social skills, your understanding of young people, pedagogy. There's so many other things you need to balance that with. And then, cut long story short, about 10, 12 years ago, I had the opportunity to become a tutor, again through the allyship from people like James Self at Cheshire County Rail, people like Graham and Les, and then became a mentor. And these were part-time roles, Matt, as you know. I did in parallel with my job. And then really through the help of Graham Keeley in particular, I was able to gain some more knowledge and insight into how an FA, a national governing body, worked. And that was quite important, Matt. And then I was fortunate to get a regional coach mentor officer's job at the FA. And that we fast-tracked a little bit, but there's an awful lot of practicing, awful lot of failing, an awful lot of moving balls, bibs and cones around. I got involved in a very good grassroots club in Cheshire called Nantwich Town. Club welfare officer, football development officer. I was also a board member, great club with some fantastic people. And that was really useful as well, because I got to see, Matt, behind the scenes of a football club. I got to see what the governance was like. I got to see why safeguarding is so important. And that was really useful when entering a national governing body, because that's actually what the national governing body is ultimately responsible for as well. I think once inside the FA, I think that's one of the best experiences I've ever had in terms of an organisation to work for. It's much maligned, but it's full of brilliant people, absolutely full of people who care, and people who really are passionate about the game and passionate about the game being safe and inclusive for all, and again, free of discrimination. Actually, the FA was fantastic as well for my development CPD, and I continued to work alongside my local county FA in as many capacities as I could. I became a board member of Cheshire County FA, and I was a keen ally and supporter of the County FA. And I was a keen ally and supporter of many other counties FA as well, including the fantastic Isle of Man. I see Simon's on the call from the Isle of Man. I got to work with some great people. And then, to be honest with you, Matt, it was very, very, very difficult to leave the FA. It was very, very difficult. And one of the reasons I left is because I'd lived in the county for 15 years. I'd seen what a difference they were trying to make and what a difference they had made. I'd seen the benefits of what they were bringing locally. And I thought, what a great opportunity to lead a great organisation with some people who really care about football, Matt. And also, Matt, what a great opportunity for me to get some new challenges and to see things in a it's the same game, Matt, but doing it slightly differently. I think a little bit I've gone from telescope to microscope. I think being at FA there's a lot of big picture stuff, and there is a lot of telescope stuff, which is also really exciting. An awful lot of strategy. And I think with the county FA, there is still an important strategy to deliver, but it's not as layered, and it's a little bit more hands-on, Matt, and some real challenges, both politically and socially, environmentally, and financially. And I've relished those challenges, Matt. It's been a great stretch for me. And I couldn't have done that without the allyship and the development of not just myself, but all those people around me who were also developing and sharing their ideas and being critical friends.
So key things, Steve, that jump out for me. So you've mentioned allyship, mentoring, relationships. You've mentioned a whole host of people who are on this call tonight. And it's a bit of an unfair question, isn't it, to ask somebody to summarize their journey in a few minutes, because we're setting you up for a fall. Because I've spent time on the phone listening to you, tapping into your knowledge, understanding, experience, not just on football, definitely not defending, although you can stick it in the top bins, I'm sure. But it's taking the time to learn about someone's journey, which is why I ask you the question. Put ethnicity aside. What is that person's journey? What brings them to the role that they're in today? What experiences do they have? But we know that ethnicity can play a part in it, and in some ways really challenging and in different ways. And we've got some work to do at the FA to address some of these stubborn inequalities. Les, if I come to you, I mentioned earlier that you've worked in and around sport, a number of different roles, certainly within the beautiful game of football. So same question, can you give us a flavour of your journey and maybe some key messages that you've learned along the way?
Matt, thank you. It was fascinating listening to Steve then, and a lot of that similarities is grassroots. I think that's maybe what joins us together in the game, that and you put in there that love of the game. I grew up in the northeast of England. You can probably tell from my accent. I grew up, think Coronation Street, those colliery houses with the back lanes, and that's where I learned to play football. You'd play headers and volleys, you'd play spot against the wall, you'd play doors. We'd climb over the fence to get into the playing field at the end of our street, and you'd let the Alsatian, the groundsman would let the Alsatian out on you, and as long as you were the second slowest getting over the fence, you're fine. But that's how we learned, and that's how we're with your mates. So, I literally, the street I grew up in, I'd say the colliery houses from Think Coronation Street, my great grandfather had lived in when he worked in the pit. Okay, so it's that sense of community. Where I grew up, there's two industries. There was the pit and there was the shipyards. And the pit got shut in about 1969. The shipyards went in the 70s. But what was interesting, that was them two industries were connected by the road called Station Road. And basically right in between the two of them was the boys' club. And that's where as young men and children we went to play. We went with our friends, we'd play five-a-side, we'd play in this little cramped pitch. But 1,000 people a week would go and play five-a-side there. And then some would then go and play for the club. And what I learned there, I wasn't a good player. I just had a passion and enthusiasm. But I was very lucky that one of the people in that club then encouraged me to become a referee, an administrator, and to look at coaching. And that's how my journey started. I did voluntary work. I had long periods of being unemployed. At 15 years of age, I got diagnosed as dyslexic. In them days, I remember just being told from my English teacher, calling me out of a maths lesson to walk me around, just be told, you've got dyslexia, your exams are screwed, but do the best you can. That was literally the pep talk at 15. Worked on some of these government schemes that are around in the late 70s, 80s. And I started working in recreation amenities, which is now sports development. It was sports development before it was even called sports development in that period. And that was how I got my break. But always involved in football, always wanted to be involved in football. And then eventually moved to the Midlands to work for a youth charity. And then I got the opportunity to work with the English FA in football development, people like Graham's on this call now and other colleagues. And to see how the game has changed, but all the time staying involved as a volunteer. So very fortunate, but actually it comes down to people. I know people have asked about role models. Steve has spoke about a few about allyship. For me, it comes down to getting good people around you, people you can work with, people you can trust, people who want to make a difference. And I think that's one of the big things I take, because actually as a sport, particularly in the grassroots world, I love, that's what it's full of.
Great. And you've mentioned again there that the power of volunteering. I mean, listen to Steve's story. Was it, Steve, that you stepped forward or everyone stepped back, in that moment when they were looking around and at you?
That's exactly how it happened.
But either way, you grabbed it by the scruff of the neck and you got involved, and you mentioned bibs, balls, cones, which as well as I do is something that I like to use. I've just come off the pitch over at University of Worcester, so hence why I look a little bit flustered. But just listening to you both speak around your journeys and how you stepped into grassroots football as volunteers. I'm sure there's a lot of people on the call tonight who are still volunteering in the game, and I think it's important that we stay in touch with the game and what it is that we're trying to develop. There's been a question come in, Steve, around your CEO role. What do you see as an opportunity, because you mentioned opportunities earlier, that come with the role that you now have, so CEO at Cheshire, and is there anything even in your short time that you've taken as a way of opportunity to put football for all on the map in a more obvious and positive way? And what's on the to-do list going forward in that role for you?
Yeah, thank you for the question. A great question. I think 4 months in, I think the most important thing for me was to actually connect with the team members at Cheshire. There's a lot of stakeholders, an awful lot, but the team at Cheshire, the staff, fantastic group of people. I think the most important thing was to connect with them. And listen, I'll say it as it is. I'm the only ethnically diverse member of that team. I'm the only Black or Asian face in that team. And does that matter? Most of the time, no. Does it matter in terms of when we talk about it in isolation? Sometimes it does matter, yeah. But most important thing, Matt, we have a county FA full of people who want to make a difference and really buy into the fact that it's a game for all. Our values are inclusive, progressive, and respectful. So what we've done collaboratively, Matt, we've had to put together a 3-year business strategy, which was linked to the FA's funding cycle. But that gave me a great opportunity, Matt, to look up and down and around and to see what we were about. From an inclusion perspective, Matt, I've been really proud to work with the team on a new equality policy. And by all means, go to cheshirefa.com and their website and have a look at that. And please give me some feedback. And just generally, Matt, just checking and testing that we are who we say we are. are we an organisation that works hard to provide football for all? And there will be some people in the county that probably don't feel that. And we need to listen to them, and we need to address some of their concerns, and we need to address some of the issues that come up. But most importantly, we need to listen, and we need to listen to understand rather than listen to reply. And I'm proud to say, Matt, that we're all doing that. Only 4 months in, couldn't have asked for more support, both from the FA colleagues and from the staff at Cheshire FA. And on the to-do list, Matt, is to make it the best county FA that we can possibly be, and make sure that football in Cheshire and beyond is for everybody. It's a little bit corny, but actually that's what you need to be doing every day. Yeah. If you find yourself in the majority, think about the minority. What are you doing for them? And that minority is everybody and anybody. We can all be isolated from time to time. What are we doing to help them? The other thing we're looking at, Matt, really importantly, Matt, is well-being and self-care, because we can't drink from empty cups. We must, as the safety instructions say, before you help anybody else, put your own oxygen mask on first. So we have to look after ourselves if we're going to help others effectively. And when we talk to ourselves, because the person you speak to most throughout your whole life is yourself. Speak to yourself kindly, treat yourself like you're somebody you're trying to help. Because, as Marcus Aurelius said, and I'm sure you know all who know Marcus Aurelius is, the last of the 5 Stoic Roman emperors. Control the quality of your thoughts, because that's really, really important. Your happiness depends on the quality of those thoughts. So we must remain positive, and we must remain stoic. There's some challenges out there, Matt.
Do you know what, Steve? I'm reassured to know that you speak to yourself, because I do, and sometimes you think you're alone in doing that, don't you? Especially after 18 months of 3 lockdowns and a pandemic. But I think it's a really poignant point around knowing yourself, and when you're privileged like we are to work in football, what's our contribution to help the volunteer workforce? And obviously, you've got the challenge as a CEO of managing a team of county FA staff, as well as serving the volunteer workforce across Cheshire and the paid workforce beyond, of course, but not forgetting that the volunteers really drive the grassroots game on.
Matt, I was just going to quickly say, sorry to interrupt you, because we've got some fantastic questions coming in from the chat box, and I think it'd be a really good idea to probably knock a few of these into the discussion. So, sorry I interrupted you. So, if you want to finish off your what you were going to say,
I thought Matt was doing brilliantly. Matt, I thought you were going great.
Hey, cool. Hey, I've played
really
football.
Enjoying that, Les. I was really enjoying that.
Steve, Matt, just jump in, just to make a point. Almost, if you're going to bring that bit to a close. One, Steve, I'm really impressed you're quoting from Roman emperors. My knowledge of Marcus Aurelius is he was played by Richard Harris in Gladiator.
He thought he played for Arsenol when I mentioned
I did as it happens. I thought it was another terrible signing that they'd made this season.
Colin, I hope that's a type and error what you've just put in that what you just put in there. One of the things, and I think this is what Steve's really good at, and what I heard in that conversation there, and I think this is what we've got to be so careful when you work in the game. We are all privileged because we have the opportunity to work in a fantastic game. And when you're in this position, the question I always think we have to ask ourselves is, what have you done today to make the game better? And what have I done to help someone? And so, Steve and myself were at a great night celebrating one of our ex-colleagues, Julie Chipchase, the other week. And one of the things I said about Julie, she was always the sort of person who looked to help people up. So are you the sort of person, when you've got there, do you push down and close the door, or do you open the door and put the hand down to bring people up? And they're the questions where I think we've got to ask ourselves in this position. And that's why I love working with one of the reasons I love working with Steve and some of the people on this call. So people like Colin, who's been an influence on me, Graham, Butcher's just messaged there. That's the quality I look for. Are you there to help, or do you make it more difficult?
Yeah, and I think Julie also had that saying, didn't she, that silence is a real tool for you, a real weapon to use at the right time. And Steve, you mentioned around listening to understand, not listening to reply. You also mentioned, does it matter that you are the only black CEO currently serving within county FAs? And I just want to put that into context. So players and coaches percentages are low if we look at ethnically diverse communities, if we look at the female game, by comparison to the population of this country. So that's what we would mean by the stubborn inequalities, or there's an opportunity to go after, to engage with these communities, to get them involved in the game, whether it's a player, coach, manager, referee. We need people, whether it's volunteers in paid positions. So the opportunities are there to go and engage with these communities. But Les, before I come to a great question that's come through in the chat, you've known Steve for many years. How do you feel seeing him in his current role, and what does the role of a CEO have in the way of a responsibility? Because I know you've had experience working with CEOs up and down the country.
I think I'll deal with the second part of the question first. The role of CEO in county FAs has changed dramatically, but I think it's changing in industry. At one time, it was the person who was about numbers, about delivery, was about that whole, almost that business side. I think the role of CEO, particularly as we come out of pandemic, as you read a lot more, is much more on those people skills. I was watching a great little podcast, watching it with Simon Sinek, was talking about, we told them soft skills. That's actually insulting to what they are. In some ways, these are the important skills. It's about how we treat people, how we look after people, how we communicate, how we look after other people and those around us, health, how we empower, how we liberate, how we develop. That's what a modern CEO needs to be. And that's what I see when I look at someone like Steve. Because he'll empower his staff, he'll look to develop the people around him, he'll put other people first. And I think we're in a different mindset, is we're in a transition period as we come out what we want the world to look like as we move forward. And I think there's some of the challenges. So what I'm describing there about, it's actually about qualities. And I go back to, I've always been a believer, you appoint good people. You bring people in who bring that with them, who actually, they don't have to read a book to do it. They don't have to go on a course to do it. They do it because it's authentic and it's real. And that's what I see when I see Steve. And I don't want to get him all embarrassed there, but that's what I see. And by the way, I see that with other people on this call. I see that with some of the people that have joined us today, because they're qualities which are about people. Because ultimately, it's people and relationships that make a difference. Certainly in this sport, we're fortunate enough to work in or love or volunteer in. And I'm now a volunteer back in the sport. And I think that's what we have to remember. It's people.
And the value of lived experience, as you've said there, and how that shapes us. Steve, if I tag on to the end of that question I put to Les, Mark Foote asks in the chat box, Steve, what are the standout differences from the FA to now operating at a county as a CEO, which is a belting question.
Yeah, and that's a great question. Thanks for the question, Mark. Hope you're well. The FA as an organisation, I think it turns over 600 million employees, 600-700 people. County FA doesn't. That's quite a stark reality. It's a little bit smaller than that. We have 21 staff, and the stark difference, it quite honestly, is I find myself sometimes wondering how the staff are so good and how hard they work, because there's a lot to do, and sometimes it's just a little bit too much at times, and that's one of the stark realities. We've come through, we're just coming through the other end of what is history will dictate would be one of the most difficult in modern times, perhaps the end of the Second World War. I know there's been some terrible challenges throughout the whole of the world since the Second World War, but this is going to go down quite high on the list of things we've had to come through. And I think that we were just readjusting back into what we think we think is some sort of a norm. And I think the big difference, Matt, is that we're not quite as layered. Don't quite have as much fat or redundancy. And I'm not suggesting that there's lots of fat redundancy within the FA. And when I say redundancy, there's not quite as much, there's not as many people to help or lean on. You know, when you've got 21 staff, Matt, when a couple of people are on leave, you've now got 19. When a couple of people are on leave at the FA, it doesn't have such a significant effect. And also, budgets are tight, Matt. You know, we genuinely have to, you know, really be careful and prudent and efficient, as you'd expect us to be. But the biggest difference is its sheer size, Matt. It's a really it's classed as an SME, a small to medium enterprise, and we have to act and behave as one, and we have to be really prudent, we have to be really efficient, and most important, we have to be creative and dynamic, because we've still got nearly 60,000 players, 500 clubs, 32 leagues. We've still got lots of stakeholders who want us to be there for them.
And Matt, I've just said something else. And one of the challenges, Steve, you must face, you're right, is a small, medium enterprise. Actually, some county affairs will be larger than some of the other large governing bodies in sport in this country. Some county affairs are larger than some of the other national associations I work with. When we support work around the world, Stephen thinks some of the countries you and I have worked in, and Pete, when we've been fortunate to work in countries. So there's always that balance there as well about recognising we all sit somewhere in that order and what we do with it.
And those numbers, Steve, they represent opportunity, don't they?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do.
To develop the game, sustain what's already there, but develop it, and hopefully encourage new people to join. So, Pete, you're going to get your wish now as a typical left back, because I know my place. I'm going to play the ball up to you in central midfield with the baton. So you've got the ball and the baton to take us through some more questions from the chat for either Steve or Les.
Okay, normally when that ball comes to me, it goes out for a throw-on. So, so I'm hoping that doesn't happen now. So here's a question for you, Steve. Who and what shaped who you are today? That's from Munetsi Mbano.
Munetsi, thank you for the question. I'll tell you what, the who, if I'm absolutely honest with you, I think it's a number of people. And I think that to pick out one or two would be quite difficult. But I think, you know, I've been quite determined and quite resilient as a youngster. That was having to be resilient. But in terms of really shaping me as the person I am today, is probably the biggest influence on me have been my children. They've had the most impact on me, and they've created the best and the most changes in me as a person and as a human being. And if we want to say that is coaching, they've had the most influence on me as coaching. I've coached two sons, Lucas and Marcus. Both great kids, both wonderful human beings to work with as a coach. That difficult balancing act between a dad and a coach. They had a huge influence on me, really huge. And I think that if you're blessed with family, and I know that not everybody is, but if you're blessed that people you're close to, you know, the people that really know you, the people that really care about you, they do have an influence because you care about what they think. You care about how they feel. You care about their health. You care about their well-being. You care about their education, and that's reciprocal because I know that they genuinely cared about me as well. And dotted along the way, there's some fantastic mentors and people that have shaped me. I've mentioned them. You know, Dr. Colin King, Graham Keeley, Les has been fantastic. Pete Augustine on the call, the wonderful Butch Fazal, who gives me spiritual guidance. Before that was a fantastic mentor. Stuart Griffin, the wonderful John Gittins, who we celebrate the life of on Thursday. There's many, and to single one person out would be very difficult, Matt. But certainly the influence of my children has been pretty stark, because often, Matt, they're telling you how it is. They're telling you as it is, as a dad. It ain't good enough, Dad. Oh, this isn't right, Dad. Or don't wear those shoes, Dad. They're telling you as it is.
That's a great answer. I'm going to ask you the same thing, Les.
Steve gave a great answer, I think, because it's multitude. And actually, as I sit and listen to Steve, I'm taking, it's people I've worked with in the past. It's people who've been my boss in the past, or friends in the past. It's family. But actually, it's a real, and there's people on this call, particularly around this subject that we're talking about tonight. There's people on this call who've been good friends and allies to me, and helping educate and challenge, but do it in a way that was supportive. But actually, here for me is what it comes down to. Every single person we come into contact with will have an influence on us. How long we're in contact with them might make, is that a deep influence? Is it a mild influence? But every single person we come to contact with, and by the way, every person, it works the other way. We influence them as well. And maybe the question we're going to ask ourselves, is that a positive or a negative experience? Have we helped them move forward, or are we pulling them back? And I think they're the things that I think we need to analyse, because we could just come up with a long list of names. It's maybe about what we do with that opportunity. And then for us, how do we take those lessons or those influences? And sometimes it's people we know, sometimes it's people we meet, sometimes it's people we spend a lot of time with, sometimes it's an article we've read in a book, sometimes it's something we've seen on YouTube, sometimes it's influence can go a long way, and role models can. And one of the challenges is to understand who's a positive and who's a millstone in them lessons.
Steve, there's been some really warm compliments in the chat box aimed at you in terms of you've inspired people. Do you mind if I come at it from another angle and say, do you consider yourself a role model? And what does role model mean to you?
Yeah. I almost think inevitably we're all role models. Yeah. And I think we are. And I'll tell you what I believe. Pav Singh uses the term real models, and I really, really like that, because I think that that I will appear real to many people, but to people that don't know me, or people that perhaps view me differently, I may not. But what I truly believe in, Matt, is role modeling behavior. I believe in that more than anything else. What is it around my values? What is it around my behaviors, my language, my interactions with people? What is it that helps them and helps me at the same time? Role model behavior is really, really important to me. And I know that there's times when we're all low, we're tired, we're anxious, we're frustrated, that we can't always display that. But if we can get 9 days out of 10 where we display role model behavior, I think that's really important. And that is particularly around the values. The FA's values are progressive, respectful, inclusive, determined, excellent. I actually think, that's pretty good. The county FA's values are inclusive, and respectful and progressive. And how do I bring those values to life every day? And do those values transfer into my home life and into my work life? Because that makes it a lot easier. Really important, Matt. Really, really important that we live those values in terms of role modeling behavior.
Questions come in the chat from, I believe it's Hawan. Apologies if I've mispronounced your name. Question for both of you, but I'll fire it at you, Les. What opportunities are available to you now working in your local communities that weren't available when working at the FA? So you've both come out from working for the FA nationally. Do you notice anything different looking at it through a local lens?
Yeah, I'm actually just enjoying being back in the. I'm doing a little bit of mentoring of coaches, but I'm back refereeing. There's a big shortage of refereeing, so I've went out when my ankle allows. I've picked up a Achilles injury at the moment. It depends what we see as opportunities. There's probably more people playing the game than ever before, but they're playing it in different ways. The game's crying out for volunteers and most different skill sets. The challenge I would maybe give the game looking now is, how do we look to recruit outside of the traditional models? Because the traditional models can then be quite... They can create some of them barriers. So, how do we recruit different skill sets? How do we recruit and encourage people to come forward? How do we make being a volunteer easier and simpler? And I think that there may be some of the challenges we'll face as we head forward over the next few years. But there's more opportunity now than ever before. There's more opportunity for paid work than ever before. There's more opportunity for. Now, I'm not saying the access to opportunity is always equal, Matt. But there are more needs, there's more opportunities, there's more stuff to do. So I think the big challenge is how do we start making some of those opportunities more equal? Particularly looking at Mark's question around board members. What's that really look like? And that's why it's so important to have people like. And Steve, I'm going to pinch that off Pav via you. That real model. I think that's a really good one. And I saw the question earlier. Someone asked about ex-professionals buying clubs. There's no rule stopping them, but maybe it's just not the best investment in the world. And I think that's what you got to sometimes think of. And I think we've had lots of change, but there's still lots to be done. We talk about journeys. Sometimes to know the journey you're on, you got to know your past, which is why actually, going back to that first question, why Black History Month is so important. You got to understand your past, where you've come from. You got to understand where you are today, and you got to understand how you're going to get to the future, and that's part of it. So there's more opportunity, but how do we make the opportunities fairer? I'd probably say. Steve, I probably just waffled that answer. You nail it in about one sentence.
No, I'd build that in 1 minute, Matt. It's actually Dewan Watney on the Isle of Man. It's for absolutely fantastic person, fantastic coach, and somebody I've had the privilege to work with over a number of years. And what's the difference? I'll tell you what the difference is. It's the difference because of people like Dewan working in the game, making it more inclusive and making it more fun for everybody. It's because of Dee Dee, who's on the call from Liverpool, because of Deborah Dilworth and the work she does to make girls, particularly girls and everybody, that makes the game more inclusive and goes out and has tough conversations. It's the work that Colin Chaiters does around disability football, or Pam Chandler, or Colin King leading the discussions around race and equality, or Graham Keeley introducing national mentoring programs to make sure that we give access to people in their own environment and understand them not just from a coaching perspective, but from a human perspective. As Tom Ford said, the most iconic of designers and a really successful businessman, he said, still all that matters is the connections you make with people. Going out and connecting with people. There are so many more opportunities for coaches today because of the transformational work that those people have done, and people like Butch. And ultimately, in a lot of areas, and I know there'll be some people still frustrated, but in a lot of areas, this national football body, the FA, and more the game of a better place. The caveat always.
So you mentioned they're working internationally. Both yourself, Steve, and Les, you've worked internationally for the FA and quite possibly for other organisations as well. Can you tell us about that? And you can maybe pick out specific experiences. And Pete, I know that you've also had the privilege of working internationally for the FA and working with Steve as well. So join in, my friend.
Yeah. So question I'm going to ask around this is, what opportunities are there for coaches to work internationally, and what does that look like? And what skill sets do you think coaches need to have to be able to work internationally? So I'll go to Les first on this one.
So pleased, Pete.
You noticed that little pause that I just gave in there?
Yeah, I held
just
my
keeping
nerve.
you on the edge. Keeping you both on the edge.
Listen to the master now, Pete. Listen to the government.
Pete, I think a lot of it depends on the context, because again, and actually, as a country, England has developed a really good reputation over the years of sending coaches out to work. Some of it because of historical background, but actually we shouldn't undermine the fact that some good people went out and worked in different parts of the world. And actually, if you were to go and analyse it, there's still thousands of English coaches and English qualified coaches working all over, whether it be working in private setups, whether they're working in professional football. I noticed we've got someone on from India today. Steve Constantine's been out in India as a national coach for a while and a couple of gigs out there. Paul Smalley, one of our ex-colleagues at the FA, is technical director in Bangladesh now. So there are examples, but there's also examples. I got a text off someone this week on LinkedIn who's a teacher working at national school in Thailand, who's looking at culture qualification. So there are people out there. The big thing I think I've taken on board, there's two things here. One, embrace the culture of where you're working. So absolutely understand about where you're working, the culture, the value. Steve talked values and behaviours, two important words. Encourage and understand that. And I think that for me is so important, whether you're out there for long term or even if you're out there for a short period. And I think the other thing I'd say, one of the reasons I love having the opportunity to work abroad, it really does turbocharge your own development and learning, because it's learning about different cultures, about a different structure, about different values. It's even when you're having to deliver, because we're lazy in England, because everyone's English is the international language, so we expect everyone else to speak English. But even then, changing the way you speak, the pace of your delivery, trying to think about different ways and different words that you wouldn't use. As a coach, I find that massively important. I remember talking to Graham Keeley around when he was coaching one of the disability squads, how he learned about communication because he had to change how he communicated, work with players with different needs. It's the same there. So I think there's two levels, but from that, embrace, respect, develop. I think I'd bring it down into those areas.
That's brilliant. Brilliant. I think having worked with you abroad, Les, and seeing you work, it was fascinating for me how you work, the way you were. We went to Ethiopia together, me and Les was almost as soon as we landed, Les was into the culture. He was, speaking to people. We went to a little local restaurant down the side of the hotel we were staying at, which was a tiny little place. And let's go, we're eating in there tonight. And that is when you start to realize around the strength of an individual, how quickly they can absorb themselves into another culture, a culture that's foreign to them. And I think that was, was a massive trip for me when I went out with Les and saw him working out there. And he certainly taught me a few things as well while we were there.
We went to a great match though, didn't we? We had a great experience going to a game though, Pete, didn't we?
Yeah, it was brilliant. It was a brilliant experience. And I'll say to people on the call now, if you get an opportunity to go and work abroad, take it.
Yeah.
Take that opportunity. Don't just think that, you're going to, that you're just always going to get a job in this country. There's a lot of diversity on this call, and a lot of diverse thinkers, a lot of diverse people. Sometimes we've got to take that thinking and we've got to sometimes leave this country, get those experiences, and then maybe come back if we want to. But the truth of the matter is that there are a lot of countries out there that will welcome English coaches, a lot, as Leslie's quite rightly said. I've got another question, and I'm going to, this is another one from the chat box. There's so many great questions. I'm hope we could run this for another half an hour or hour, or even 2 hours, I think. But so this is a big one for me. So I'm going to ask you, Steve, what are the main blockers that stop people of color becoming board members?
Yeah, fantastic question. I can only answer it from my own experience. And anybody on this call, Pete, that would like to speak to me about becoming a board member or getting involved in that governance process, Pete, can we make sure that, Matt, anybody that wants to contact us, we can put them in touch with me so I can help with that. Mm-hmm. Main blockers are, I think, from my experience, I can't speak for everybody, but my experience, and Les would be good to come in on this as well. I think it's about a little bit around networking, and it's a little bit around getting to understand who it is you need to ally with and who needs to ally with you, just so you can start having those informal conversations, because we do need more diversity on boards, and that is a direction of travel. That is part of the government's business, but it's part of what we're trying to do, and it's part of who we are. But ultimately, administration isn't quite as easy a sell to an awful lot of people, and that doesn't cover necessarily gender or race. That's just not as exciting to a lot of people, but it actually is very rewarding. You can get involved and you can help to shape and steer some of the decisions, whether it be around clubs, whether it be in county FAs, whatever. But actually, one of the biggest blockers is we just need to make sure we communicate and we ally with the right people. And I'm happy, and I know Les is, to help people with that. Whatever your local area is, you know, you are able to get involved with board membership and governance, even as a volunteer, as an independent. We just need to ally you with the right people. We just keep talking to the right people and networking with the right people. The other thing I would say, Pete, is education. There have been some courses and some development. I think even Deborah on the call, I think the FSA have done some. I think Sporting Equals have done some training for potential board members. I think that's important as well. And I think Les would agree. It's giving people that confidence and people giving that leg up as well. So Pete, how do we twin people and ally them and signpost them to the right people to talk to? And we need maybe to balance that with a little bit around support them around governance, language, process, procedure, because there's a big part to play in that as well. Les?
Yeah, Steve, I think you've nailed some of that there. I think the question sometimes, who puts the limit on our own abilities? Because sometimes we do it ourselves. So I think that's a question I'd pose. I think the training there, I love what he's talking about ally and networks though. And Mark, I think the question goes wider than just in the boardroom. That's one important question. We've got Steve as a real model here tonight. But I'd expand that into also the comment often get about getting that first role in professional football as a coach or a manager. Actually, a lot of it is putting in the allies and networking. And you know, I was told the stories of certain managers out there that spend all the time going to the old reserve games and U19 games and getting known and talking to the directors and the wives of directors and just to build up people. And somebody says, "Oh, I shouldn't have to do that. It's a 21st century." But actually, sometimes it's that networking I think is absolutely vital. So, but I loved what you taught education there. In there, I think that becomes key because then I remember Noel Blake talking. People remember Noel, terrific player. You know, was a colleague at the FA.
Leeds United's first black captain, Les.
Was he?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I spent some time with Noel, and he said actually he turned the challenge around. He said he would always advocate to black coaches and black players he was talking to about you get your B license, you get your pro license, you become the most qualified, so people can't use that as an excuse not to interview you. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but maybe there is that sometimes about don't give people excuses. I think I'm always feeling guilty saying that because it comes back to Mark's question, but I think there's a lot of stuff we have to do in that space. In there, and part of that is making people feel comfortable with difference sometimes as well.
Yeah.
And Mark, you've asked me the question there about how do we make white people feel comfortable talking about equality for all. Part of it is being able to have these conversations. Part of it's being to have these conversations where people don't feel they're looking to be tripped up, but are looking to be supportive. So supportive environments which allow people. I think Steve touched on it earlier. People will make mistakes. They'll use a terminology that's a bit out of date. I've been fortunate. I've had the opportunity to spend time talking as friends and colleagues with Pete and with Colin and Butch and Steve, so we've been able to have them conversations sometimes. And I have got a little concern that I read the stuff around cancel culture and I read stuff what's going on in universities. We need that space sometimes to learn. And as we all know, when you learn, you sometimes make mistakes. But what's in the heart? And we're only going to move things forward by having the opportunity to do that. Now, people keep making a mistake. I think it'll become slightly different. But sometimes we need to create a supportive environment which allow people to learn and develop and move forward.
I just add that, Pete, sorry, Steve Fithian makes a great point about the journey and not a destination. Steve's a great advocate for constant learning, Steve Fithian down in Sussex. And also volunteering. Some great advice from Steve in that last comment in terms of board members and if you want to get some new skills. clubs, organisations, they'll welcome volunteers, and that's a great way of extending your network, and it's a great way of getting knowledge. Great way. I'm a product of volunteering personally. It's 10 years as a volunteer. I learned a huge amount as a volunteer.
Now, we are nearly running out of time here, but I want to ask this last question. There's still so many questions that we could ask, and it's been brilliant tonight, and I want to thank everybody for their questions. So the question to both of you, and I'm going to have to get you to answer this one quite quickly, is what would you change if you were to repeat your journey? And that comes from Steve Parker. And we're going to start with you this time, Steve. I'm not letting you off the hook this time, fella.
Thanks for the question, Steve. I'll tell you what I'd change, Steve. And I have, Steve, I've thought about this. What I'd change is nothing in terms of the people, and nothing in terms of the experiences. Absolutely nothing, because the failure has been just as important as the success. The one thing I'd change, I'd have started it all a bit sooner, because it's been so fantastic. I would have just started sooner. That's the one thing I'd change. I wish I'd got into the development side of myself in terms of coaching, education and studying. Just wish I'd got into it sooner. So what I'd say is, I wish Pete had got the advice of maybe started this understanding of how to be a really person in and around football, particularly when I was still playing. I never gave it a thought, Pete. I never gave it a thought. And I'm not saying that you should stop playing. I'm saying that give it some thought. I never listened to coaches particularly. Now I appreciate what they did for me, and I appreciate what coaches are doing currently. It wouldn't change too much, Pete. Just maybe started the educational piece a bit sooner.
Okay. And Les?
Great question. And I'm sat here thinking, and I'm going to say nothing. And the reason I'm going to say nothing is every experience makes you who you are now. And if I change one thing, which might have made my life easier 30 years ago, by making my life easier 30 years ago, it might have taken me down a different direction today. And life's too short for regret sometimes. We've had experience is what makes you. And it's that sliding door movie. Very remember the movie Sliding Door. Of all those Trekkies out there, there's an episode with Picard where he gets a second chance at life to not repeat the mistake he made 30 years, and actually realizes that mistake is what defined him. So sometimes you've got to be careful not to do that. Everything's meant there for a reason at times. What do you learn from it? What do you take from it? What helps make you stronger? How do you bounce back from it? And yeah, otherwise we'll keep trying to rewrite everything.
I've got to say, two brilliant answers there to end tonight's webinar, and I want to say a massive thank you to Les and Steve for coming onto this webinar. For me, two absolute inspirations in my journey, and have helped me on so many occasions. And I tell you what's really great about this as well is some of the people who are on this call, they are also massive inspirations to me as well. So I see Butch, I see Colin, there's names on here who I think to myself, oh my God, if these people hadn't been in my life, I wouldn't be doing this webinar now. I would still be working in a beer factory, getting flies all over me. But so I want to say thank you so much for all that. Putty's on here, who's a brilliant man who I've met recently. There's some and you both have talked about some of the people who are on the call and the inspiration that they've given you over the years. So a big, massive thank you, Matt.
Yeah, I suppose a takeaway message for me and a way to full stop what's been a great evening is summarise Steve's last answer there. Start sooner, understand and develop myself. And I know having spent time working under Steve's leadership for 12 months during the D&I team, 9 months, he certainly got me to look at myself and broaden my horizons. So I've got Steve to thank for that in terms of my personal development and my journey. So thank you, Steve, and Les, who's also had the challenge of line managing me. I love the line, every experience makes you who you are, and I think we should allow it to shape us and learn from it, good, bad, or indifferent, and remain open-minded. And that's certainly what I've been exposed to working with both of you as two great people, let alone consummate professionals. So I'm hoping that people have taken away moments of inspiration with your answers tonight. And Steve, I thought it was a great offer that you made for people to contact you if they've got any questions. And I know, Les, you're always open to having a discussion around football, sport, anything development related. So thanks for your time and insight tonight, gents. It's been really appreciated.
Thank you, Brad, for hosting so graciously.
Thank you. And before we go, there is still another great webinar that's going to be hosted by one of our colleagues, Mr. Butch Fazal and Mr. Pav Singh, called Black, English and Proud. And it will be on Monday, the 25th of October. And the kickoff time for that is 6:30 in the evening. And we have got some absolutely fantastic guests on that webinar. I'm going to say, I don't think they're going to be the two guests we had tonight, but we've got Chris Powell and Paul Nevin who will be on that webinar, and that's going to be
they're
a great.
Not too bad, are they, Pete?
They're okay. Yeah, they're okay. Yeah, they're going to beat you two, are they? Come on, let's be honest. So I want to say to everybody tonight, thank you so much for tuning in. It's a real honor to have everybody here. Les and Steve, massive thank you to you two for being here tonight and giving up your very, very valuable time. And Matt, thank you so much for being a brilliant host with me tonight. And I hope to see everybody fairly soon.
Thanks, everyone. Happy Black History Month. Thanks to the wonderful comments and the people on the call putting questions in. Thanks to Kimio and Graham and everybody. Simon, thanks for everybody. Happy
and Steve, Colin is still schooling me.
Yes, I know.
20 odd years, nothing changes.
He's our leader.
But Colin does win typo of the evening.
Be your hitman. I mean, Kitman.
That wasn't a typo.
That wasn't a typo.
So thanks again, everybody, for joining us. Hopefully see you at an event soon.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Take care.